Let me introduce Peter to you. Peter Merry. If you go on the internet, of course, he's all sorts of different things, but that's other people. This Peter Merry is co-founder of Wyrd Experience, which is a leading-edge consciousness technology research company, and he's co-founding chief innovator of Ubiquity University. He's published 4 books. The 2 latest ones, one Leading from the Field, which is about the implications of a unified field of consciousness for leadership, and Evolution, which is the latest one, which is based on his PhD research, which is about the philosophy of interconnection. So if you'd rather read a book than his huge PhD, then this is your opportunity. He's brought copies with him. And where he talks about how things are perhaps a bit less linear than perhaps we'd hitherto thought. So I'll shut up and let him tell you about it. Peter Merry.
Morning, everybody. So, imagine that we had lights scattered around our living spaces and our working spaces that reflected back to us what was going on in the field of consciousness in those spaces. Imagine that we had wearables that would glow the moment that synchronicity was just around the corner, or that the concert you were at was particularly engaging for the audience as a whole. Or imagine, particularly for the younger generations, that you're playing League of Legends and the power of the spell that you cast in your game is directly related to your inner state, maybe just like the original magicians used to. Imagine toys that kids could play with, influencing the way they move around based on their intention. We have smart homes. Imagine weird homes, where you can flip your TV remote to weird mode and practice changing channels with your intention. Imagine research technology that really enables us to take a disciplined and deep analysis into the fields of consciousness and how they respond to the different kinds of interventions we make, to the rituals that we do, to the way we organize our meetings, all those kind of things. So a number of those technologies already exist. 2 of them are in the room. And all the others are possible with existing technology. So we're about to enter an era of what I call consciousness technology. This is technology that's going to be interactive to our intention and responsive to our collective fields. On the west coast of America, in Silicon Valley, they're calling it spirit tech. And I know that some of the people with some of the deepest pockets in the world are very interested in this whole sector, maybe not always for the right reasons. However, you can be sure that over the next couple of years, this kind of technology that's responsive to our intentions, that's responsive to our collective fields, is going to start entering the mainstream. So what does that mean for how we're going to start experiencing ourselves and our reality as human beings? We had a CEO come into a Wyrd Experience the other day who was a Cambridge physics graduate. It took him 2 minutes to sit in front of the screen where he could make the line go up and down to ask the question, why wasn't I taught this at Cambridge? 2 minutes of experience. It's the experience that's going to transform people, and where they won't bother with the skeptics anymore. I mean, you can watch as many Gaia programs as you want, but the moment that you have a direct experience of a piece of technology reflecting your inner state, skeptics can say what they want. So something is going on. Something is brewing in Earth's consciousness, and particularly in human awareness. I'm sure many of you have heard of the telepathy tapes, or been tracking the telepathy tapes, a podcast where they're looking at non-speaking autistic people who can communicate through typing. And they found that they're picking up the thoughts of their parents, much to the shock horror of the parents, picking up the thoughts of their teachers. And these people meet in a space they call the Hill, a psychic meeting space. And in one of the podcasts, the interviewer asks, how many of you were there? It's like, oh, 1,542. This has gone viral. Millions of people are listening to this podcast on the telepathy tapes, and it's fundamentally challenging the way they see reality. Now, one of the people to pick up on it was Joe Rogan. I'm sure familiar to a lot of you, one of the top podcasters in the US, 20 million followers on YouTube. And he heard about the telepathy tapes thing, mentioned that in his podcast, and then recently it's had Hal Puthoff and Tom Campbell on his show, who many of you will know are probably some of the foundational people around Monroe Institute and the use of remote viewing and that kind of thing. And talking for hours about consciousness. 1 million views in the first day. So something is going on. When Cambridge University's dictionary last year comes up with manifest as the word of the year. And if you've got kids and they're on social media, you'll know that this whole manifestation intention thing, is huge. There's a lot of rubbish, of course, out there about it as well. But there's an awareness that there's got to be something more than this material reality that our culture reflects back to us. Another big thing in terms of emergence is, of course, the whole UAP disclosure thing in the US, where the US government has basically declared, look, we have biologics, as they call them, of aliens, we have alien technology, we're collecting it all, and Congress passed a bill requiring government to disclose all this information to the general public. And what they're finding, if you listen to the people who are giving testimony in Congress, who've been out looking for craft that have crashed, there's a whole team trying to explore the relationship between consciousness and technology, because they realize that this craft is driven by consciousness. So they can't reverse engineer it. They're there's something else going on here. And here we've got technologies emerging, technologies that we have right here, that are ways for us to be able to look at how consciousness does interface with technology. And then this is coming up for the first time this year in America, the Psi Games. It's like an Olympics of psychic powers. So people are being invited to come and to try out their Psi abilities. And if you go to their website and you look at all the people who are going to be there, it's kind of a who's who of the Psi world. So all of these for me are signs that something is emerging, and it's emerging fast. So this came out of a book that I wrote 20 years ago now, called Evolutionary Leadership. And the story that I've been telling for 20 years is, look, we're in a non-linear change moment. Old systems are breaking down and new systems are emerging. It's just a natural process of evolution. And when you're in those moments, it's what the system scientists call a chaos point, where the old is breaking down, but the new hasn't crystallized enough to take over the helm. And for many of those years, I've been saying, you can't see what the next level of emergence is going to be from the place we are now. You can't imagine it. However, now I think we're starting to see the early signs of what that's going to look like. And that's going to be the kind of thing that David was pointing to yesterday and that I'm describing here, which is what I call a consciousness civilization, where we reintegrate our connection to the inner states, and we realize that the potential that has. the core, as I don't need to say any more about because David laid it out so clearly yesterday, is that split between matter and spirit of the old system. And it emerged originally with the Industrial Revolution, one could say, as a solution to a set of problems that we had back then. But every solution that we come up with always has the seeds of the next set of problems. Every solution always has the seeds of the next set of problems. So we're now harvesting those seeds from the emergence of the Industrial Revolution and that pure focus on material reality, and being invited to the next stage. And the question quite simply is, how quickly can we learn and evolve? We're no different to any other species on the planet. Evolve or die. Basically, that's the stark reality. So the level of suffering that we have to go through before we hopefully get to the next stage, it's directly related to how quickly we learn and evolve, as would be with any other species. So this kind of breakthrough, as it were, or this emergence into a reintegrated human being where the inner and the outer are connected once more, is not just a nice thing. It's a survival imperative. Right? The nature of the challenges we're facing at the moment are so complex that they're way beyond possibilities of our cognitive, rational minds to solve on their own. And I experienced this directly when we, in the work I was doing in the Netherlands, we had 20 stakeholders, a project from the Dutch government back with Millennium Development Goals, which were before the Sustainable Development Goals in maternal and newborn health. 20 stakeholders facilitating their collaboration to have a bigger impact on this kind of major global challenge. And at some point we all sat down as a team and it's like we're trying to match complexity with complexity. And it's just too much. It's just too unpredictable. And when you kind of step back and you go, it's the scientists say that we only understand 1% of reality, because the rest of it is dark matter or dark energy, which is just a way of us saying we don't really know what's going on. So we're basing a lot of our decisions and our evaluations on 4% of reality. Well, how effective is that going to be, given the kind of complexity that we're facing? And we all sat back and there must be some simplicity, the other side of the complexity, that would make this whole thing a lot more graceful. And just through inquiry, that kind of tipped us into this whole exploration of consciousness and working from the field of unity, as it were, first, assuming from the start that everything is interconnected, and then looking at how the parts self-organize as you take that perspective, rather than starting from the parts and trying to stitch them together, right? Which is, say, what systems thinking might do. Take all the parts and try to work out how are they related, and what happens if we do this, and what will happen after that. The complexity is far too great. So we need to be able to access deep insights that act like acupuncture on the whole global system. So where are the fundamental points, leverage points, that if we can work there, that will have ripples across the whole system? So how do we get to those insights on the one hand? And on the other hand, how do we implement those kind of solutions as fast as we possibly can? And the way to do that has got to be through a kind of grace, which doesn't come through the rational mind. So we know that we can access these solutions, these kind of deep insights, when we shift our state of consciousness. We know we can do that whether it's through meditation or breathing practices or psychedelics or whatever it is. We know that when people get stuck on things and you're able to shift your state of consciousness, you just download. If you listen to the telepathy tapes, kids, they talk about accessing a field and asking a question and getting like almost navigated as if to a kind of energetic library where they find the answer to the question they need. Now it's all there. If we can learn to shift our state to be able to access that information, then we can find all the solutions we need. But then we've got to be able to implement them in a way that integrates as much of life's wisdom and intelligence as possible in doing that. And that requires not a linear 5-year plan. It requires simply the intuition as to what's the next step to get enough data to take the step after that. That's all we need to do. It's how do we continually presence ourselves and our organization to the natural intelligence so it can guide us to take the next steps. And that's a radically different form of culture and organizational structure and processes than we've inherited from the Industrial Revolution. And it requires that inner state. It requires all the kind of qualities and things that people like you are helping to develop in the world. So this isn't, as I say, a kind of luxury thing. Everything that everyone in this room is doing is essential to the future of humanity, or let's put it in a bigger context. This is the Earth attempting to work out how can we keep this self-aware capacity that we've evolved as humanity alive. Right, so this is the Earth talking to itself right now, yeah? You're the Earth listening to itself right now. It's stupid that we've got that, you know, but that's the reality. So we are the Earth right now, trying to work out how do we move life forward and get beyond this kind of sense of separation so that this self-aware capacity which the Earth developed through us can keep going. If not, you know, this experiment will fail and the Earth will keep going and try something else. You know, it's not a big drama for the Earth. It may be for us, but not for the Earth as a whole. So it's about, you know, remembering that context. So we're what I would call a civilization between stories. And the story that has inspired us at Wyrd is this whole ancient lore, L-O-R-E, around Wyrd. So before you read my bio or anything else, who heard of Wyrd spelt like this? Okay. There's a smattering, right? Probably through Brian Bates's work, right? The Way of Wyrd. Okay. So this is our North European indigenous term, meme, concept for the interconnected web that generates all life. It was the word the Anglo-Saxons used, the Vikings used. In Norwegian it's Urd, U-R-D, it's the same word. And it's the root word for the German word werden, which means to become. So it is literally describing the process of taking things out of the subtle into the manifest. It's that process of accessing the fields of probabilities and pulling things through into the manifest world. And yet, of course, it got buried very deep in northwestern Europe when the church came in and then materialism came in and got corrupted and strange, whereas it was actually a very normal part of the culture in the Anglo-Saxon tradition. It was where the shamans or the wizards or the sorcerers went to heal people, to get a sense of the patterns that are emerging for the future. But we lost that. Luckily enough, they kept it all the stuff alive in the East, so we imported Qi and the Tao and all of these things, but we actually have our own indigenous tradition here that we've said at Wyrd we need to reclaim and reawaken. You know how many people have these experiences and they say, but that was really weird. Wouldn't it be great if in that moment they go, yeah, but that's actually quite normal. So how, you know, there's that moment where they use the word weird to realize that, oh yeah, it's not strange, you know? How do we make weird the norm? So as we step into this mission, as it were, of reintegrating this wisdom, this knowledge that we have about consciousness, this experience of living co-creatively with the field of consciousness, we need to also be disciplined in the way we do it. And we're going to need new maps and new compasses. It's a whole world. I mean, the exciting thing, particularly for the younger generation, is it's a whole world that is very unexplored, right? So whole possibilities now of being able to go into these worlds and with the latest technologies explore, well, how does this whole world of consciousness work? Well, how does the field respond when we do this or that? What are the qualities that we can pick up in the field of consciousness? So we're going to need the technologies to be able to add extra data points to our own subjective and intersubjective experiences. When we say, wow, that felt really good, how did that register in the field as well? Not denying the importance of the subjective and intersubjective, but adding a slightly more objective, I would say 100% objective view on things. How do we develop and work with those technologies? So that's what we've taken upon ourselves at Wyrd, is to try to put some of that technology out into the world so people have the ability to do that research themselves. By all sorts of synchronicities that I can tell you over a beer tonight, we ended up becoming the home of all the equipment that was used at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, where they spent 28 years researching how our intention in a state impacts what should be purely random events in the world around us. That was because one of the aircraft companies came to them and said, seems like our fighter pilots, when they're getting stressed, influence the instruments on the dashboard of the aircraft. Can you please find out what's going on and stop it happening? And so they funded a lot of the initial research at Princeton. They started with mechanical devices like this. This is Murphy, who is a random mechanical cascade. 9,000 balls fall over the pegs, create a random distribution curve, Gaussian distribution curve at the bottom, and they would have people just sit in front of it and try to make more balls move to the right or left, and found that most people could do that, didn't have to have psychic skills, and they were small, but they were repeated effects, which meant they got statistical significance. They then moved to using digital technology and developed something called a random event generator, which uses a quantum tunneling process to basically generate loads of ones and zeros really, really fast. And there is no explanation in material physics for how anything can influence any of these devices. And yet, when they sat people in front of a screen to try to influence the ones and zeros through an interface of a line moving up or down, they found that people were able to do that. So they were getting structure in the random data. When the groups had a strong shared experience, they also found they were getting structure in the random data. So when all of this came across to us, came across the Atlantic to Yorkshire, where we established Wyrd Experience, which is there now, you can walk in and you can experience yourself influencing these technologies. It also came with an introduction to a man called Wolfhard Janu, who an Austrian scientist, and he discovered, it was again a big synchronicity, he had two individual random event generators connected to two different laptops in the same room where they were doing a martial arts practice, and somebody pointed out that the data streams on the two REGs seemed to be doing the same thing. And they were kind of, wow, that's kind of significant, because one, you've got two devices, which means you're more likely to pick up a field effect than you've just got one. But not only does materialist science say nothing should be able to influence any of these individually, let alone have two that are actually doing the same thing, correlations between the two data streams. So we further developed that and turned that into a technology called the Wyrdoscope, that is sitting here. That's two REGs in it. It's generating two random data streams, and it's got a Raspberry Pi microcomputer in it, and we can then analyze the correlations between those two data streams. And it's giving us about 4 times more the hits, let's say, than the original Princeton device that was just one REG looking at deviation from randomness. Based on our research so far, it looks like we're being able to see 30 to 40% of the events that actually happen in a room in the data. So you could say it's kind of sensing or mirroring what's happening in the field of consciousness. There's a number of different organisations working with it, including our very own University of Northampton. Here, Chris we're looking at football stadiums, what happens in the fields of football stadiums. And I'll give you a few more examples here. So a lot of the research was done during Tantra rituals, and the technology was picking up the start of the ritual, the key peaks in the ritual, and the end of the ritual. So you could literally just pick out the data, look at it, and you could say, this must be where the main event happened during the ritual. Bang, there it was in the data. The other big piece of research was in ICUs and a hospice in Scotland, where you were able to pick out the moment of death. So when the EEG registered the moment of death, you were also seeing it in the Wyrdoscope data, which is interesting because if science is saying nothing in the physical world can influence this technology, then isn't this scientific evidence that something non-physical is happening at the moment of death? Interesting. This is a kid's birthday party that Kirsty organised, and she, for fun, as you do when you're obsessed with this kind of thing, was running the technology, and you could pick up very clearly the magician when they did their kind of trick. But the biggest peak is when the magician asked the kids just to lie down and be quiet together. This is, we just got the data back from this literally last week. Harvard Medical School took a Wyrdoscope to a consecration event that Sadhguru was doing at their center in Tennessee to see what we would pick up there and compare it to, for example, the Global Consciousness Project technology. And to the second that Sadhguru enters the room, you see a peak in the data. So the moment that he comes in, the field shifts. 3 out of the 7 times that he comes into the room, you can correlate that directly with a peak in the data. So they were kind of quite impressed with that. And this was at the Integral European Conference we were at just a couple of weeks ago, where Craig Hamilton did a meditation with people, and it was very much kind of focused on letting go. And it was that moment that he really dropped people into that letting go space that you see this big peak and structure in the data. So I'm going to tell you this story as well, because this, I think, is the most remarkable thing that I've seen in this data so far. So I guess many of you are familiar with Hellinger's constellations, family constellations, fields like you kind of create a field and you represent different members of the family through the kind of audience. They come in and they find themselves, as it were, channeling the energy of the different representatives of the family. And you find that, you know, it does a lot of kind of healing experiences happen through that. What they did here is that they were doing a geopolitical constellation. So they had 40 different representatives: war, peace, future generations, ancestors, South America, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, you know, all represented. And but before they started it, they had each country that was represented in the room. There were about 30 different countries. Do a tiny little representation of their country. I'm afraid us Brits just read "To Be or Not to Be" for the first stanza or something. But anyway, they got through that, and then people entered the space, and the constellation, there was no language, just started processing. So the instruction you're given when you walk in is feel your body, where do you want to move to, how do you want to interact or relate to the others that are in the space. That's it. But it was a very, very intense process. What you can see on this slide is all the red lines on the left of the different countries who did their presentations. And the structure towards the right side is the constellation, starting from the moment people entered the space. You can see the structure in the data, the key starting point on the left there. And this is kind of the field, as it were, over a whole hour, structure in what should be purely random data as people process all these geopolitical issues through this constellation. And it marked very, very clearly the end of it as well. But the most remarkable thing, when we looked at the data afterwards, there are 1,000 data points that were significant in this structure that you're looking at now. What's really important in this research is where you put the starting point of a data point, because that determines the future structure. So one of the big criticisms of the early work with Princeton and currently still with the GCP, the Global Consciousness Project, is that a human decides what the starting point is. And that gives the skeptics all sorts of ammunition, which is, oh, you chose the starting point, so you're influencing the peak. What Wolf did with his software is have the software automatically scan for what the most likely starting point was of the event. And nearly always it picks up the actual starting point. So with the Tantra ritual, it'll scan the data, you'll see the peak, and it'll say, I expect the Tantra ritual started here. And that is nearly always the moment that they kind of form the circle, as it were, at the beginning of the ritual. So in this data, when we were looking at it, all 1,000 of these data points went back to the same starting point before the constellation. And that starting point was the moment that the 2 Ukrainian participants introduced themselves to the group. Just taking the implications of that. Nobody set up this constellation for it to be about Ukraine. So, but what this data is telling us unequivocally is the whole constellation was in the context of Ukraine, and the energetic work of the constellation started at the moment that the Ukrainians introduced themselves. And we saw it happen when the Russian girl introduced herself as well. The constellation was happening before the formal start of the constellation. So who was running this constellation? It wasn't the humans. The system, the field, had somehow orchestrated this constellation to be all in the context of what was going on in Ukraine. It's kind of, when I first saw the data, I couldn't believe it. It's quite remarkable. So we've got the technology now to be able to help us understand what actually goes on in the fields of consciousness. I'm going to share just one theory slide because we're trying to make sense of, people say, how does all of this work? And this is the model that we have found best helps us explain the actual phenomena that we experience. It's based on Walter von Lukadou's work, and it's derived from generalized quantum theory. He calls it the Model of Pragmatic Information. And what these are the kind of conditions that he's found that fit the theory and that we found enable the biggest impact on the data, you could say the biggest dent in the field. So you've got to have a system that has a clear boundary to it and that is self-organizing. Take a ritual, for example. Right? People are there for a reason. That's the shared meaning. There's a clear definition and boundary of the system, like this conference. Right? So as this conference goes on, the field gets denser as people kind of interact and sink into it more. So you've got to have a very clearly defined and meaning-rich system. The anomalies that emerge in the field aren't linear or causal. They seem to just happen instantaneously across the field. So if you listen to the telepathy tapes, children and the researchers, they say, let's say you had the mother in one room and the child in the other room. And the moment that the mother opens a book and looks at a page, the kid is already typing what they're seeing on the page. There is no sending. There's no time to send. Right? It's an instant awareness of one thing in the field at the same moment. So telepathy, in a way, is the wrong word, because tele suggests sending. But there is actually no sending. Chris and I were having a debate about this yesterday. The best word is entanglement. However, that is the use of a term established in physics for human systems. But we don't have yet an appropriate term, I'd say, for entanglement in the human world. We call this a syntropy detector, the Wyrdoscope kind of opposite of entropy, picking up structure and connections in the field. Coherence is key, so the more emotional, symbolic, relational coherence, it's all about relationship, the stronger the effect you'll see in the field. If you try to measure it too much, it disappears. And many of you will know this as elusive psi. You have to just let it be there and have the experience. If you're kind of going, okay, what's the data saying, or what's the light doing? Then you find that the effect diminishes because you're trying to kind of grasp it. If you've got, we've been quite a few experiments with cameras trying to film effects, and it's bizarre because the camera is on, you know, they've got all these cameras, and then the effect happens, and then the effect just disappears, or the camera breaks, or something goes on, which means that you can't take that measurement and take it outside of the system to show the rest of the world, which makes it, you know, quite hard to communicate. And it's unique in its own context. So if you try to repeat it in a very kind of mechanical or mechanistic way, then again, the effect starts to diminish. Again, talking to Chris yesterday, we were saying that there's a difference between that and the human systems where you repeat it, because when you bring a new human being in, you bring diversity into the system, and that enables the effect to stay high. But if you're doing it from a purely physics perspective and you keep everything exactly the same, then you see the effect diminishing. It has to be alive. This is what we found. If, like, at a conference where people are sitting and thinking about something, you see very little effect. The biggest effects are in the break, because that's when people self-organize and have spontaneous systems with each other through conversation, and it's alive, right? It's not pre-planned, it's not, people aren't in their heads, it's that kind of flow state that actually has the biggest effects. So, on the one hand, there's the technology side, but as we know, what's really important is that the way we embody this perspective, these are the kind of qualities that seem to reflect the biggest effect on the field or on the data. All things that I think we've all heard, but are easier to say than to do. So a quality of simple presence, when you're not thinking about it, you're just with it. Deep compassion, so the heart connection. They found at Princeton that couples in love had the biggest effect on the technology. There's a clarity that emerges in that space that isn't a cognitive clarity, but just a clarity of see what's there. Grace and joy and playfulness, curiosity. This is what makes it all work. Not trying. If you try, it doesn't work. In the research, they call it the release of effort effect. It's like you've lost your car keys, and you kind of, where are my car keys? And then you kind of go, sod it. Oh, there they are. Because you stop trying. Boom, air recognition, right, they appear. And this flow, this kind of life energy, life force. So it's not purely transcendent in the sense that you have to be a kind of really highly qualified Zen monk to be able to do this. It's about being in that flow state where the life energy is flowing, but there is no attachment to outcome. You know, there's no grasping or anything in it. So if you think these are qualities that we want, that I think most of us would agree would be great if more of humanity could develop, if we could all develop more. So that's why we developed the Wyrd Light as a device that people could have in their homes, in their meeting rooms, in their yoga studios, wherever, that would be giving them feedback on how present and connected they are, most fundamentally. And what people find out is they can sit in front of the light and they can make it turn the color they want, but even that language is wrong, because if they try to make it turn, it doesn't work. But if they sit and entangle themselves with it in a kind of curious state, then they find it dances with them, and they have a shift of color that they bring into their minds. You see it get brighter. We've correlated the anomaly in the data with brightness, so the brighter the light gets, the stronger you could say the imprint is on the field at that point, and the colors are just related to certain data structures, which is all still a mystery. We still don't know what is it in human behavior or experience that generates particular data structures and therefore particular colors, which is great, because there's a whole domain for us to keep exploring and researching. Ultimately, it's a software solution, so we're calling it Wyrd Within, like Intel Inside. So we can take any piece of hardware and any piece of software and make it consciousness interactive, basically. And the kind of red chair you can see at the top, this company called Immortal, out of Texas, I think they are, in the US. So the NFL football stars use it to regenerate themselves. These things cost $150,000 a piece. But they want to embed the weird software in it so they can work with the players on their intention. So that they can give them like feedback from the lights about how aligned their intention is, how present and connected they are to the field as they're working with their intention. The Oros one, two kind of faces, that's a well-being game out of California. So people will be able to get feedback on an app or on a synchronicity stone, as we're calling it, like a stone that you'll be able to hold in your hand that'll glow as the kind of field gets stronger or coheres around you, or as the synchronicity increases. So there's all sorts of possibilities for how this technology can find its way into the world. But I think what's really important, particularly as you've got, you know, some of these players who may not have all of our best interests at heart, getting interested in this, is how we build what we call the world of weird. So what's the story we tell ourselves about the technology and its implications, right? What's the actual, I'd say, deep learning, as it were, that we're relating to it. So it doesn't just become the next consumer gadget, but it actually informs the way we think about ourselves and the world around us. So to finish off, a little weird poem. You ask what weird is. You're breathing it now. It's the thread your soul followed before your bones had names. It's the silence that shaped your voice before you ever spoke. Do not seek it with questions. It's not an answer. It's a kiss from the unseen. A scent left behind by a lover who left just before you arrived. Weird is the wind that turns you toward yourself. It's not your path, it is the turning. You cannot see the weave, you are the weaving. You cannot grasp the thread. It moves through your hands like light through water. Come, fall into the pattern without needing to see it. Dance before the music begins. The drum beat is already in your blood. The sorcerers do not explain. They love like rivers or weep like fire. They know there is no map because the way is being written by your very steps. Weird spins you and unspins you with every blink. Die into this breath and be reborn in the next. And listen, not with your ears, but with the part of you that remembers you are born of the stars.